To understand the history of people with developmental disabilities in Alberta, the first place to start is with institutions. An institution is a place where many people with disabilities live together and are taken care of by staff. From 1900 to 1970, thousands of people with disabilities in Alberta were put in institutions. Some would spend most of their lives there and did not see their families very often. At the time, some people with disabilities lived with their families, but most were sent to live in institutions. The Alberta government passed a law in 1918 called the Mental Defectives Act. The law gave families permission to have their relatives with disabilities placed in institutions. At the time, the main idea of professionals in the disability field was that people with disabilities were better off living in an institution and away from the community and their families. Schools for people with disabilities were not built until the 1950s. Community services came even later, the late 1960s. One of the first institutions in Alberta was built in Ponoka in 1918, and it was called the Alberta Hospital Ponoka. In 1923, the largest institution for people with developmental disabilities was built in Red Deer. It was called the Provincial Training School. The Provincial Training School was set up to train people with disabilities until they learned skills so they could live and work in the community. While some people eventually left the institution, others would stay there until they passed away. Now let's see what you've learned about life in institutions. Let's do the Life in Institutions worksheet in your passport. Pause the video now while you work on this activity. One person who lived at the Provincial Training School was Leilani Muir. Leilani lived in the institution from age 10 to 21. She had both good and bad experiences living there. On one hand, she made some nice friends, had food to eat, and a bed to sleep in every night. But on the other hand, Leilani was sterilized when she was 13 years old without knowing it. When a person is sterilized, they can't have children. The nurse told her she was just having her appendix removed. From 1929 to 1972, a law called the Sexual Sterilization Act made it legal for people with disabilities who lived in Alberta to be sterilized without their permission. Over 2,000 people with disabilities were sterilized. Leilani did not find out she was sterilized until many years later. She tried many times to have a child of her own, but couldn't get pregnant. After seeing her doctor and getting tested, she found out she was sterilized when living at the Provincial Training School. Leilani knew it was wrong that she was sterilized without her knowing it. She did not give the doctor her permission to have the operation. Because of the operation, Leilani couldn't have a baby even though she thought she would make a good parent. This made her feel hurt and upset. In 1995, Leilani decided to self-advocate, to speak out against her unfair treatment. She took the Alberta government to court for being sterilized without her permission and for the pain she felt for not being able to have children. A year later, she won her case. Leilani's self-advocacy has inspired other people with disabilities to speak out against things that are unfair. Leilani has taught us that people with disabilities have rights like everyone else. It's your responsibility to speak up so that your rights are respected. Now let's watch Leilani tell her story.
And then when I was 10, 3 days before 11, I was put in an institution by my mother. And it was called, at the time, it was called the Provincial Training School, which is now the Missioners Center. So to me, as a youngster, I didn't realize really what type of institution that it was. To me, I thought it was an orphanage. I didn't know it was a eugenics board. I was taken up to the main administration building, And that's where they did all seeing all the people that they were to do this to. There was only one nurse with me, and she stayed outside, and I went into the room. They asked me to go into the room, and there was about, I'd say there's about 5 or 6 people, maybe sitting at a table. And they only asked me a couple of questions. And I remember one when they says, well, how old does a baby walk and talk and stuff? Well, I already had a baby brother. He was only 8 months old, and I already knew. So I said, well, about a year old, you know. So, but I don't remember the other question. So I guess they were surprised that I knew that question. I don't remember them all. 5 minutes of their time, though, and of my time. That's what wrecked our lives. The day that they were going to do the surgery, everyone was we had to line up to go to school. And the nurse kept me back. She said, well, you're not going to school today. I didn't ask why or anything. I just, oh, okay. You know, whatever I was told, okay. She took me into the living room, and she said, you're going to go and have your appendix out. And I said, well, okay. Nothing was bothering me, but I just, I didn't know anything about the surgeries, because I was the type that did not ask questions, because I was raised that way by my mother. Don't ask questions. Don't ask nothing. So I never did. The day that I went, there was already 3 other girls there, already at the clinic, because they had built that clinic since I was in the institution, and they did the surgery at the clinic. Before that, they used to take girls and the boys to Ponoka to do the surgeries. But when I went there was 3 other girls and myself. So they did 4 of us the same day. I guess more 23 than 24. I was with a guy. Actually, this is a strange one, but first guy I dated was the first guy I married. But I wanted children. I didn't even know that the surgery had been the sterilization until 23 or 24, in that area. I went to the doctors, and I just remembered something that my mom had said once when I was 18. She says, no man will ever have you or marry you because, and then she never said anything else. And me, like I say, I never asked questions, because with her I get smacked across the mouth, so I never ever did ask her anything. I went to the doctor after I'd left my mother. I got away from her when I was 21. And I was with this other gentleman, and I wanted to have children. So I went to the doctors, and I told them that I wanted to have children and that I was not getting pregnant. I didn't know why. Well, of course, they asked me lots of questions, and I told them about the surgery. I says, not knowing that your appendix don't get taken out of the middle of your stomach. So they did test, and there was this much of my left tube left. Nothing else. That's when I found out that I had been sterilized. Why did it take me till 45 years of age to realize what was done? And what they had done to all of us. And I didn't realize it was an institution until years later. Like, I always thought it was an orphanage and didn't realize the damage that they had been doing to us. I didn't even realize that I didn't have an education. I thought, I just got to make sure it never happens again to someone. Because they don't know what the damage they do to us. They destroyed our lives, 100%. You're only half a person when you leave that institution. You go in there a full person, you come out half a person. The psychiatrist in Victoria. I'd seen psychiatrists before them, but 2 minutes, 5 minutes maybe. You don't need to see us, there's nothing wrong. Like they wouldn't listen to my story. When I wanted to talk about it, bring it out, because it was hurting. You know, I was holding this all inside. Too many years. I phoned the Mental Health Association in Victoria. And I talked to a girl there, Myra, and I told her exactly what I was going to do and how I felt. And it was close to Christmas time, by myself. Marriage had broken up, adoption fell through, everything was just gone kaput. And she asked me if I could come in the next day, so I said, yeah, I'll come in. I went in, and she introduced me to Dr. Kovacs. And for the first time, I felt like there's somebody in the medical profession that had a heart. Because to me, anytime I saw one, they'd say there's nothing wrong. Dr. Kovacs sat down and he says, you talk, you cry, you do whatever you want, you tell me everything. I bet you I must have been in there 3 hours talking to him. And he turned to me and he says, you know, I am really appalled to admit to my profession that somebody could do this to a young girl and get away with it. And it was through him. George Kurbatov, who was a psychologist in the same building, worked with Dr. Kovacs. He's a psychologist, Dr. Kovacs was a psychiatrist. And he says, I'm going to go get Dr. Kurbatov. So between the two of them, I talked to them, and they couldn't believe what I had gone through and that no one would listen to me before. And it was through them telling me to do something about it. I tried from '84 to get something done. I've seen top-notch lawyers in Victoria, I've seen doctors, and all of them said nothing could be done, or the statute of limitations has run out long ago. You'll never be able to fight the government. When my adoption fell through, I thought, there's no way. Somebody's going to pay. Somebody has to pay for what they did. That's when I decided to do it. And it's helped a lot of other people. Because otherwise this would still be hidden away and nobody would have known. I'm glad I brought it out. Yeah, I opened a Pandora's box and it was a big one. But our history was really bad back then. And we got to put a stop to it and make sure it never happens again. And I will.
Leilani has such an amazing story to tell. Let's do the Leilanis Story worksheet in your passport. The activity will show you what you've learned about her life. Pause the video now while you work on this activity. Congratulations, you've finished Unit 12 of My History, Our Future. Next up is Community Schools and Winifred Stewart and Christine Meekel's story.